My name is David Hansen. I'm in the vaping community known as Vaping Jesus. Now I'm here to talk to you about addiction. Alright, so there's a lot going on right now in the vaping industry, and the reason why I got into vaping was primarily to help people with addiction, because it is one of the most successful avenues for addiction. Now, addiction has to do with solace, which solace is giving comfort in grief or troubled times. Now, solace is my mnemonic. It's S-O-L-A-C-E. This is how you remember the attributes of addiction. Now, the attributes of addiction encompass your state of being, your overindulgent nature, your lack of discipline or self-control, your associations or social culture around you, your cognitive behaviors or learned or trained behaviors, and eliminating the dopamine stimulant that you tend to gravitate towards to satisfy your state of being. Now, what brought me upon this discovery was an experiment called Rat Park. It was done by Bruce Alexander, a Canadian scientist, back in the late 70s, and it was published in 1981. Now, what Rat Park did was they took the old experiment where they used to stick a rat in a solitary cage, and he had two bottles, one of water and one of heroin. And the little rat, and they did this with nicotine, I believe, as well. The little rat would drink themselves to death on the heroin or nicotine, and so they assumed that heroin or nicotine was addictive. Now, see, these are tests that a lot of health organizations do that are quantitative. They're not qualitative. They don't take into account all variables. Bruce Alexander took into account all the variables. So what he did was he put the rat in a rat park. And that was where he could play with other rats, have a nice environment, lots of balls to play with, other rats to associate with, and so forth. And what he discovered was that the rats would shun the heroin. They would drink about a quarter of it because they weren't addicted to the chemical per se. The chemical is a dopamine stimulant which causes you to desire it, but it does not cause you to be addicted to it. In another example, the men from Vietnam, they went to Vietnam. They were in a very bad mental state. It was like hell, they said, being in Vietnam. And so they did heroin. And the heroin is a dopamine stimulant that overwhelms your entire brain. And so this dopamine stimulant they used to alleviate their bad mental state they were in when they were in Vietnam. When they returned, now here's some research. According to HuffPost Healthy Living, in an article published on April 22nd, 2015, 95% of the Vietnam vets that returned from Vietnam quit using heroin after returning to the United States. This data was gathered by the Special Action Office of Drug Abuse Prevention, a special office that was created by President Nixon. Now, with those two bits of research, I came to the conclusion that it is your state of well-being that causes you to need the dopamine. Whatever dopamine you choose, whether you choose to have cocaine, which overwhelms your brain with dopamine, or a mild antidepressant called nicotine. It is a plant derivative that comes from eggplant, potatoes, tomatoes, peppers. There's a lot of nightshade plants. It comes, I believe, in chocolate and apples as well. But they're in nanogram amounts in those fruits and vegetables. In nanogram amounts, very low amounts of nicotine. Because in concentrated liquid form, nicotine can actually be very harmful. So you don't want it in concentrated liquid form. You want it in little nanograms like in your fruits and vegetables. And so this your overindulgent nature causes you to overindulge in these dopamine stimulants. And you don't realize you have an overindulgent nature, but you do. If you look at our society around us, we are overindulgent creatures. In fact, if you go out to eat, chances are, majority of the time, you will eat until you're stuffed or you're full. You will not eat until your hunger pains cease. You will eat till you're full because you're overindulgent by nature. You don't just eat till the problem is done. You eat until you can't eat no more. That's just an example of our overindulgent nature. And we overindulge, and then we overindulge in dopamine stimulants when we have a bad mental state. Then there's your lack of discipline and your lack of self-control. Now, when you overindulge, the only way to cure your overindulgence and to keep it under control is to have discipline and self-control. And those who don't usually learn it from their immediate culture, their social culture, their familial culture, all the people around them. That's where they learn their traits, characteristics, and attributes that cause them to become addictive. There's children whose parents were alcoholics, and they grew up around step-parents who were not alcoholics. And they end up gaining the attributes of the step-parent because that is your social culture. It's not so much hereditary to be an alcoholic. In fact, alcohol, drugs, nicotine, cigarettes, they are chemicals. They are products that cannot be part of your DNA. What's part of your DNA is your hereditary characteristics. And those are usually formed from the people around you. Now, I'm not too sure on whether or not they can be passed on hereditarily or if you just gain them from your immediate culture, but the evidence goes to show when you observe all the people around you that usually it comes from your immediate environment. Now, in addition to that, you have your associations, all the people around you, which is part of your social culture. And the associations around you influence your decisions. You are influenced by other people. Hopefully they're good people, but if they're bad people, you need to get away from your associations. You need to get away from your social culture and your environment if they're influencing you to make bad decisions. If you don't, it's like the crab pot theory. The crab pot theory is that when there's a boiling pot of water, and you got crabs in that boiling pot of water, and they try to get out, one tries to climb up onto the other to get out, and in doing so, pulls that one down. And so they're constantly pulling each other down, trying to get out. Same thing goes with your associations. You're trying to fix your associations, you're trying to get out of the bad situation you're in. You start trying to, other people that don't want you to succeed are going to try to pull you down. So you got to get away from your associations. And then you have your cognitive behaviors. And your cognitive behaviors are things like you always have to have something in your hand because you're used to smoking cigarettes. Or you have to have a cigarette after every cup of coffee. Or you have to have a cigarette after every sexual interlude. Or then there's also little cognitive behaviors as far as associations that you may have. So you get pleasure when you taste a certain taste. Because, like for instance, the cigarette. Every time you smoke a cigarette, that nicotine stimulates dopamine production in your brain. And so every time you taste a cigarette, you associate the dopamine pleasure with the taste of the cigarette. So you got to get past your cognitive associations that you do in your head with certain flavors and smells and certain behaviors you use with your hands and so forth. And then you got to eventually eliminate the dopamine stimulant, which means you have to use a gradual process to get rid of that dopamine stimulant. Now, a lot of what I'm talking about has been researched, and I've got plenty of people that I've researched it through on my paper that I've written. But nonetheless, let's see here. James Boyd of the Vermont College of Medicine. Him and many other researchers have found that mice and primates, they can't addict them to nicotine, or heroin for that matter. It's hard to addict primates and animals because it just further proves that because you can't addict them to these things, it's not the chemical so much that's addictive. It is all a part of your human nature, your state of well-being. There's a lot of variables you got to take into consideration. Nothing is ever cut and dry, nothing is ever black and white. But science tries to make sense of everything by making tests and performing tests that are pretty much black and white, cut and dry. That's just the easiest way to do a test. They don't account for a lot of variables. They don't make qualitative tests, and a lot of their tests are rarely ever qualitative. And a lot of their tests are usually biased by other entities like politicians and health organizations that have vested interests in other things. So you got to take all that into consideration before you listen to the sensationalism of media that tells you this is bad or this is good. Now, when it comes to vape juice and vaping, this is very important. Vape juice is a graduated system of getting rid of your addiction. So you can slowly wean yourself off. It also attributes to the cognitive behaviors and the flavor associations, because vape juice can be made in any flavor. So it can actually help with your addiction, and it can be an excellent crutch as you're trying to get off of your addiction. It is not a medical substance to get you off. It is not a pharmaceutical product. It is just a crutch. It is a system to help you get off of your addiction. Because vape juice is not a pharmaceutical product. It's made of 2 food preservatives and a plant extract, a plant derivative called nicotine. Now nicotine, what that is it is merely just a plant extract of so many nanograms. But it was used as an insecticide at one time. And this is where the politicians and pharmaceutical companies and the health organizations, you can understand where they're being cynical and trying to demonize vaping, because they say there's insecticides in your vape juice, but that is what nicotine was. It was an insecticide, and it was put on crops. And we ate the fruits and vegetables that had nicotine on the crops because it wasn't poisonous. It was poisonous to bugs because of its concentration level. Now, if you had a straight bottle of nicotine, it's going to kill you, because in large concentrations, it is dangerous. But in droplet form, from the crop dusting, it wasn't dangerous. And then in a vapor form, it's even less. For instance, when you're smoking a cigarette's about 1 milligram of nicotine, 1.5. Then when you get a 3 milligram bottle of vape juice, a bottle of vape juice with 3 milligram nicotine, that 3 milligram nicotine that you're inhaling, you're actually getting about 1 milligram of that, because it's in parts per billion, it's in a vapor form. And then when you exhale it, there's even less going to anybody else. So no one's going to really suffer from secondhand inhalation of vape juice, because it's just a water steam vapor from your atomizer. And so you're getting less nicotine when you're inhaling it because of the parts per billion. So it's even less toxic than if it was to be put on your fruits and vegetables, which the FDA had no problem with when they used to crop dust farms with nicotine. So that's the agenda of the politicians and the health organizations, by saying there's insecticides in your vape juice. They also say that there's antifreeze in your vape juice. Well, the second product is propylene glycol. You know what, before I go to propylene glycol, one thing I must talk about with vegetable glycerin is the majority of your vape juice, 80% of it, 89%, is vegetable glycerin. So when you blow out a cloud, that cloud is all pretty much vegetable glycerin. You're not seeing nicotine, you're not seeing flavorings and diacetyl and propylene, you're seeing vegetable glycerin. There's a little bit of propylene glycol, but you're seeing mostly the vegetable glycerin. Because vegetable glycerin was like in your fog machines. And vegetable glycerin is it's actually coconut oil that's been refined. It's a humectant, a solvent, it's a sweetener, it's a filler in a lot of low-fat foods. And by the American, the American Dietetic Association, they consider it a carbohydrate. And the American Dietetic Association. And then, vegetable glycerin is metabolized more slowly than sucrose, and therefore has a dramatic effect on blood sugar levels, which is great for diabetics. But nonetheless, getting aside from vegetable glycerin, let's go on to propylene glycol. So propylene glycol, it's a water inhibitor, it's a humectant, it's in your foods, it's a food preservative. And now what propylene glycol does is it's got a few properties. One, it inhibits water, so it'll dry out your throat, it'll dry out your skin, it'll cause you to get dehydrated, so you need to drink water when you're vaping. But propylene glycol is also an antifreeze chemical for food products, because it's a food preservative and it's used in food products for many different things. And so the politicians and the health organizations, what they'll do is they'll say, oh, there's antifreeze chemicals in your vape juice. Well, yeah, it's propylene glycol, which you already eat in the foods you're already eating, just like vegetable glycerin. It's already in the foods that you eat. And when you heat these foods up, or these drinks, because it's also in drinks as well, when you heat up these foods or drinks, you're inhaling a vapor of vegetable glycerin, a vapor of propylene glycol, okay? And it's not so concentrated, so you're not going to have a cloud of vegetable glycerin, but still, it's just a food product is all it is. And this propylene glycol, they try to demonize vaping by calling it an antifreeze that's in your vape juice. Well, you use it in the antifreeze in your car, because there's an antifreeze that's safe for animals and kids to drink. And if you look on the back of the antifreeze bottle that kids and animals can drink, it says propylene glycol. That's all it is. It's just propylene glycol that you pour in your car. So it's not really, I mean, it is an automobile antifreeze, but they're trying to make it sound like it's the one that we know of as being harmful and that can kill you. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in their propaganda that's against vaping. It'd be in their propaganda that'd be for vaping, if that was the case. So you can understand what their agenda is. So you got flavorings. There's a big controversy with flavorings. One of the big controversies is diacetyl. Now what diacetyl is it's a chemical in popcorn flavoring. It's also in coffee. So what they did was OSHA came in, and the Jasper Popcorn Company had workers that were getting labored breathing. So OSHA came in to investigate. Well, these workers have been working there for 10 years. They've been working there probably 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, I imagine. And I imagine the microwave popcorn company had vats, if not rooms full of this flavoring to make all these popcorn bags. And they were probably, I imagine, in a steam vapor that they were inhaling. And they got labored breathing after 10 years of these large amounts of diacetyl. Your vape juice bottle will never have that much diacetyl. It'll have droplets. It has about 3-4 milligrams, perhaps, of droplets of flavoring in your vape juice bottle that you're vaporizing. Not roomfuls, and you're not doing it for 10 years, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So the studies were not qualitative. They were very shouty. They were very, science just didn't have what they needed to come up with accurate investigations. But we understand now that this diacetyl will not cause the popcorn lung unless vaped over long periods in large amounts, which you never will with a vape. And to support my point, we go to coffee roasting. At the coffee roasting companies, they found diacetyl as well in coffee flavoring. You drink coffee. You drink it in a cup of coffee. There was another study done where they found diacetyl in the vapor coming off of your coffee cup. Now, how many people do you know of that have popcorn lung from drinking cups of coffee? Not really anybody, have you? You see, the diacetyl in the flavoring is no more than the diacetyl in a cup of coffee. In fact, it may be even less because it's coming straight from the coffee versus droplets of flavoring that have diacetyl in it being vaped in parts per billion vapor. And must remind you, the vegetable glycerin is your cloud, not the flavoring. So you don't see the concentration of flavoring, you don't see the concentration of nicotine, you just see the concentration of vegetable glycerin when you blow a cloud. So the diacetyl isn't so much a problem as they make it out to be. So with that, the vegetable glycerin isn't really a problem. The nicotine is merely an antidepressant. In fact, let's talk about nicotine. Nicotine is an excellent antidepressant. And what it is, it's a dopamine stimulant that stimulates dopamine production in the brain, which can also help with Parkinson's because Parkinson's is a depletion of dopamine. So nicotine can actually alleviate a lot of the Parkinson's symptoms. It could also alleviate a lot of the ADHD and Alzheimer's symptoms. But that's mainly because of its attributes. Like, for instance, nicotine, other than its antidepressant effect, it causes relaxation, sharpness, alertness. It enhances concentration and memory. And those things can help with ADHD and Alzheimer's. It also, while we're on the subject, it also reduces appetite. It raises your metabolism. I've felt it actually helped me to digest a lot better, and I've lost a lot of weight with nicotine, which is healthy. If you're losing weight and it's raising your metabolism, that's also going to be very healthy for you. It reduces pain and anxiety and increases arousal. There's many good attributes of nicotine, but I like to take. Here's some more. It helps you become more productive. It overcomes attention deficit problems. It relieves stress, anxiety, panic. It relieves Parkinson's, like I said. It provides relief for those with mental illness. It enhances performance and fine motor skills, attention, and memory. And its potential to prevent and treat Alzheimer's. And those are things that I've researched. There's many good attributes to nicotine. However, there are some side effects to nicotine. Some side effects are increased heart rate, headaches, nausea, dizziness, high blood pressure, and most of those are caused by overindulgence. And when it comes to high blood pressure, salt also causes high blood pressure. It can also help with many food addictions. You think of all the cancerous chemicals in all of these foods that you eat, and you replace your cognitive receptors with flavorings from vape juice. Therefore, you won't need to eat the junk food. You can vape your Fruity Pebbles instead of eating your Fruity Pebbles. You can vape your bad alcohol instead of drinking it. You can vape your cigarette and tobacco flavors instead of smoking them. It's a very healthy crutch for many food consumables, many alcohol consumables, and many cigarette consumables. It's going to help the health of our nation. So you can see that nicotine has some good side effects as well as a few bad side effects, but most of those bad side effects are due to over-nicking. That's, doing too much nicotine, too much vaping. But let's go to the antidepressants that the FDA allows. Let's see, Prozac. Side effects of Prozac are increased suicidal thoughts, behavior, sexual dysfunction, nausea, diarrhea, weight gain, high blood pressure. Wellbutrin or Zyban. The side effects are sore throat, dizziness, nausea, constipation, increased sweating or tremors, irregular heartbeat, anxiety, memory loss, seizures, eye pain, vision changes, suicidal thoughts or tendencies, hallucinations of bugs crawling on skin called tactile hallucinations, abnormal dreams, delusions, agitation, mania, hypomania, hostility, confusion, and many more. Ritalin, that has side effects of nervousness, anxiety, nausea, vomiting, palpitations, headaches, increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, psychosis, severe blistering, hallucinations, unusual behavior, blurred visions, confusion, shortness of breath, seizures, uneven heartbeats, heart attacks, stroke symptoms, and insomnia. How about Paxil? Paxil side effects: nausea, dizziness, blurred vision, tremors, decreased interest in sex, easy bruising, easy bleeding, irregular heartbeat, muscle weakness, seizures, eye pain, swelling, redness, vision changes, fast heartbeat, hallucinations, loss of coordination, unexplained fever, painful erections, rash, itching, swelling of face, tongue, or throat, vomit that looks like coffee grounds. Zoloft has side effects of nervousness, dizziness, nausea, diarrhea, upset stomach, abnormal ejaculation, abnormal abdominal cramps, flu-like symptoms, fatigue, memory impairment, stiff muscles, high fever, confusion, fast or uneven heartbeats, hallucinations, overactive reflexes, vomiting, loss of coordination, weakness, seizure, shallow breathing. And then, of course, you got OxyContin, which everybody knows is a horrible drug, and they allow 11-year-olds to take OxyContin. Now, you look at all these FDA drugs for antidepressants that you give to your children, of all people. So if the tobacco industry wants to use politicians and health organizations to put children up on their platform and say, oh, vaping is bad just as tobacco is bad, and da-da-da-da-da. Let's put children on the platform to the FDA. All of your side effects, you still want to give them those drugs when you have an excellent dopamine stimulant called nicotine that is an excellent antidepressant, a lot better antidepressant than all of those drugs that the FDA puts out, and then you want to demonize vaping, and you want to make it so that only 21-year-olds can vape it? And that's a travesty in itself as well. You got men on the front lines in the military fighting and dying for your country, but they can't vape because, hey, they're not 21 yet, but they can sure as hell die for you. Die for you politicians. Die for everybody, all these health organizations. They put their lives on the line, but they can't vape these antidepressants. Oh, wait. You can do weed. You can smoke weed all day long, but you can't vape this antidepressant nicotine. All because it has a stigma tied to a cigarette, which is pretty much smoking. So it's understandable that these politicians and these health organizations are not on your side. So when you see any bills having to do with tobacco, understand, we have not had many tobacco bills come about until recently with vaping. Now, we've had some in the past, but it hasn't been so big and such a big issue until vaping, because they include vaping along with the tobacco bills. And when they include the two together, now the vape industry has to pay the exact same taxes and regulations that the tobacco industry has to pay. And when we, the vaping industry, have to pay the same taxes and regulations as the tobacco industry, they can hike it up as high as they want, and the tobacco industry can afford it. But the vaping industry can't afford it, because the vaping industry is mostly your small business, mom and pops, that make up your middle class. And when they can't afford it, they're crushed. And there goes your middle class businesses, there goes your middle class jobs, there goes your lower class jobs. There goes all the jobs and all the businesses in the middle and lower class, because big tobacco wants to monopolize on the vape. It's going to help the health of our nation. It's going to help our economy by letting all these small businesses become large corporations instead of letting big tobacco monopolize on all of the businesses that are trying to come up. So any politician that supports these tobacco bills is a crook and is in bed with big tobacco. Now you say, why are they in bed with big tobacco? Here's why. Big tobacco has paid the government, all the governments, all the states, X amount of dollars to keep them safe from the lawsuits that the Cancer Association was going to do, the Medical Association was going to do on big tobacco for cancer, because the cigarettes were causing cancer. So they were going to sue big tobacco. Well, big tobacco paid the politicians to protect them, and the politicians spent all of that money, all the states spent all of that money before they got it. So now they owe big tobacco X amount of dollars. So now they're in bed with big tobacco. And so are the health organizations, because the more unhealthy you are, the more money they're going to make off of you being unhealthy. So everybody, health organizations and politicians, are not looking out for your health if they support these tobacco bills and they support these anti-vaping bills, vaping industry. There are people in the health organizations that are on your side. There are politicians that are on your side, but you have to find them and you have to gain their support. So I hope this talk educated you enough to understand what's going on right now with vaping and understand a little more about addiction. And if you're interested, I will eventually get my paper out. We'll have all the cited references that I have that support all of what I've been talking about. Good night.